be something on the other side. We are all told that truth is merely a conclusion that can reliably be derived from some observable phenomenon. We forget that truth is a tool. It is the hook upon which we hang our deeds and the bed from which we rise each day. To assume that death is the end is to assume that our being extends no further than the physical substrate that carries us. This assumption does not account for the way in which we experience being alive, nor does it sit comfortably aside the fact that we are not yet able to comprehend the way in which our being manifests itself from the flesh and bone that binds us. I believe that those gaps in our understanding are still wide enough to cast doubt on such conclusions. I believe that those gaps are yet wide enough for our souls to fit through and drift onwards into some new realm.
Ducks eat bread.
They do. They like it.
It's said, hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is Freddie Biggs. I'm going to sing If I Were a Butterfly. Here it goes. If I were a butterfly, I'd fly in the sky, 'cause Jesus knows why. And if I were a fish in the sea, I'd ask the Lord that I could see. And if I were a mockingbird, I'd thank the Lord that I was a bird. And if I were a bee in the sky, I'd thank the Lord that I could fly. Rocking hard every single day. Lord is the one in original way. We got Dog Bark Gospel Channel for you. He's got a harmonica that always comes through. Step into the middle and step into the front. Don't forget about our man, Pastor Paul. He takes us out to lunch. Bow tie doing it really big. He ain't no pig. He might take a swig. Oh my gosh, what was that? I think it was a locomotive, maybe even that. Back and forth and back. I'm rapping on the mic and that is a fact. In old Sacramento, tomato, cemento, a mama mento. And when we're on the microphone, we come so dang tough, rough, tough. I don't think you got the stuff. You ain't got the stuff like me. You ain't got the stuff like me. I said, you don't got the stuff like me. I don't roll in a tree. I'm not a baboon. I'm not a baboon, G. I come up soft. I come up tall. I drink my coffee. I do it like the Gaddafi. And we're stepping to the middle at the center. Doing it big up in this monumental. Alright.
Guys, I'm back. Special thanks to you. I felt disabled not being able to play the brand. Really. Here's some of my favorite brands.
Camera set. Set. Sound set. Set. Roll it.
The laws of probability and chance indicate if an infinite number of monkeys are given typewriters and allowed to peck away for an infinite time, they will eventually produce all the world's great literature. But in the process, we find monkeys, like humans, also turn out quite a bit of absolute junk.
Action.
In voice recording, the essential quality we must strive for is intelligibility.
Cut. That was good. Good. Very good.
Do you think it was me, CB? Do you think it was really me.
You were sensational, Pussycat. Just sensational.
We did it, CB. Another great shot.
Okay for sound?
Hello and welcome. What? Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. It's so much easier when I can hide behind the branding, and I'm glad you're here for it.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh, boy.
How you doing?
Yeah. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, man.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
You walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord, and hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah. Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me. walk with me. Walk with me,
Lord, walk with me.
walk with me.
I'm on my DDS.
Yeah, Lord.
I want Jesus
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
to walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy.
That's a deal with that one, huh?
Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king, and David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. You gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. One more branding, and this is a public service announcement.
Approaches are that's where the alignment is between Graham and I.
Okay, so what is bringing down the fourth wall project, Graham?
A terrible spell, and part of that spell, the humans have the campfire circuitry. For whatever reason, probably because it. So like, the television engages that, and like that's when your tribal elders are passing on information and stuff. So like those things are hijacked and make everybody feel like they're audience. And like if you watch characters in series that do break the fourth wall, and that's what the fourth wall I'm referencing when I do it. It's the wall behind which you are audience and not a human. So
okay.
Hashtag paintball for Jesus, @GrimGrizz, hashtag break the fourth wall.
So like you do like break the fourth wall that doesn't exist and be like,
break the fourth wall a little bit.
You really helped me break the fourth wall. Like, it's just people.
Good poetry is definitely always trying to break the fourth wall.
Always tried, as GrimGrizz says, to break the fourth wall to the degree that I can. All right, we're breaking that fourth wall while Chad is making a wall of tile. Look at all those spacers. Look at all those spacers. We got this nice booty shot of Chad here. That's what people come for. That's why people pay the big bucks to get the booty shot of Chad. So, welcome, Embody. Thank you all for coming. I almost fell off my chair when I'm gonna mute Chad. I almost fell off my chair when. Yeah, sorry, Chad. You just a lot of sound there at the work site when Cale said "Welcome, Embody" to Rod Dreer. I thought, what on earth Rod Dreer is thinking about what's going on with Cale? Well, welcome. This is the last Friday in the month. It is not the first Friday of the month. So next week, Lord willing, we will do the Bridges of Meaning question and answer. This is not the question and answer. This is the sort of 2 weeks in review. As some of you might have noticed, I haven't been able to put out the amount of content I usually put out, and I've been taking some stuff from the TLC and putting that up. But there's been a lot going on in terms of Jordan Peterson world, with big conversation with Alex O'Connor, AOC, as I like to call him. And then the IFS stuff with the Scott Alexander blog post, and I'm reading the book, and it is a fascinating book. Of course, I have way too many topics of interest that I will be able to cover. I watched the Tom Holland, Louise Perry conversation, which was outstanding. Phoebus pointed me to the Louise Perry, Nellie Bowles conversation. And since I had to subscribe to Louise Perry's Substack to get the whole Tom Holland conversation, I did. And so I listened to the whole Nellie Bowles conversation. That was good too. And I've continued to dive into the sincerity, authenticity, profilicity stuff. And yes, Synod. We will start. Synod began formally. Officers were elected. That's, of course, a big topic on CRC Voices. AOC the younger. I like it, Zach. I like it. Yeah. There's plenty of stuff to talk about with respect to Tom Holland. Pseudo AOC. And of course, Chad keeping it real here by looks like putting in someone's shower. Very big shower. Nice big shower that person's going to have, and Chad's going to do a great job. So we appreciate that. Well, let's begin. So what we're going to do with Week in Review is I'll mention something, and if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. And Chad, if you want me to unmute, just give me a signal and I'll unmute you if you want to wade in. Otherwise, you can just keep the Chad booty shot and the tiling progress in. I love this all got started back in the Bridges of Meaning days when I'd be sitting in my office physically alone, and I wanted to be virtually not alone. So we started the open studio, where I just encouraged people to turn on their cameras for whatever they were doing working. I was a very boring thing to look at working. The problem was people kept wanting to ask me questions, jump the queue on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. And so I couldn't just keep my camera on and get much work done because people wanted to talk. And I was a boring person to watch work anyway, because I just sit there and of course you can't see what's on my screen. So then I tried to figure out how to share what was on my screen while I was working, because often there'd be logos and I'm reading the Bible or I'm reading some commentary or I'm thinking about some web thing anyway. So yeah, we're breaking the fourth wall as Chad is making a wall. We're doing all of these things, but let's not bury the lead. Just as I was heading into my son's wedding and we had family from East coming in town, what does Jordan Peterson decide to drop but his conversation with Alex O'Connor? That was really an absolutely outstanding conversation. Thank you, John Vervaeke, who talked to Alex at a thing whose video hasn't been released yet, a thing in New York. And I thought that was probably the best, most productive conversation between Jordan Peterson and a celebrity atheist. Alex O'Connor is no longer sort of this old reactive, shallow atheist like someone like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. But Alex is thoughtful. Alex has gotten a degree in theology, and so he knows something of what he's talking about. And I think that conversation was absolutely tremendous, as was the Unheard conversation that was up before with Justin Brierley and Elizabeth Oldfield. I think I see Justin and Elizabeth really as sort of this little corner England in some ways, higher status, better accent. But yeah, better hair. Is that what you're saying, Chad? Boy, that is looking like a nice shower. That is looking like a really nice shower. Yeah, Chad's doing a beautiful job. So, okay, if you want to talk about JPB and AOC, that's Alex O'Connor, not that Congresswoman from New York State. If you want to talk about that conversation, jump in. There's still a lot of meat on the bone I have to take care of in that conversation. As the two things that are sort of, so in one of my recent videos, I talked about how AOC is the true friendly atheist. That's right. If you have a question, you can put it in you can put question in all caps if you don't want to do a super chat. Super chats, of course, get my attention unless they're dropped in by our own our own friend CW Weeks, whose super chats I just ignore until they get into like over $100. Then I'm going to pay attention to see super chats. But Yosef, all right, Yosef, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
First, mazel tov on the wedding.
Thank you very much. It was a joyous occasion. It was a beautiful occasion. Sorry, I don't share pictures of those kind of things. My family's a little sensitive about me using their images. So I, you know, hey, they haven't signed up for this. I did. So I'm just
totally understandable.
Oh, Joseph, what did you think of the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor conversation?
So it was really good. I don't often watch Peterson, and Luke actually, for some reason, decided to say, "I want to know what Yosef and Chezi think about this." So he dragged me in, and I'm glad he did. I thought it was really good. And I've never seen Alex O'Connor before. Like, I had no idea what to expect, and the way he was able to get Peterson to answer questions, I thought was excellent. But where they ended up, like, at least so I don't have the DW Plus, but like where they ended up in the free version, I think Alex had this like last question, or it was also, maybe it was like in the last 5 minutes. It was like really at the end, which was like, what makes this Christian exactly, right? Or what defines a Christian? Because the way that Peterson was defining this, and like he was saying, well, this pattern exists in Taoism, and this pattern exists, and like obviously it's going to use different language, but like all the examples he was giving of like, hey, this makes you a Christian if you hold this view and this view, like those are all things that like I hold, but I would, so like if he's going to define Christian so broadly that it doesn't have meaning that gives it an identity, like what's exactly the point? I mean, and there are people who do that here in our little corner too. There are people who say like, oh, well, like you're obvious, like they would consider me a Christian, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And not only that, but it's, I mean, given the history, there's also kind of like a bit of pain associated with like being told that I'm a Christian. But I just, yeah, I don't know. I wanted that to get explored further, and I don't think they went there in the, even though it was in the last 5 minutes, I don't think they went there in the next part. But no. I would want to have pushed him more on that. Like, what is it? And if it's just a language, maybe, you know, if everything's pointing to the same pattern, and a Christian just use this specific language to point to that pattern, whereas, you know, a Taoist uses this language and a Jew uses this language, then like it's not, you know, like that seems to also be missing something, right? I mean, that is one answer. It's like a very perennialist answer. I don't know that Jordan would go into that space though.
I think he wouldn't. Now, of course, during the mid to late 20th century, I think Judeo-Christian was then the term trotted out. And that term was often used, as in some ways it is today, with sort of a political overlay. and of course, Muslims will say, hey, wait a minute. And so then sometimes it's expanded to Abrahamic, but we're really talking about the influence of, obviously, first the Hebrew scriptures and then the New Testament on a culture. And so this is very big Tom Holland size Christianity, but you're dead right that there's a ton to talk about in there. And even the first video that I made, because I didn't have much time to do that, but one of my first car videos, they're talking about the definition of a Christian. And that's where, of course, my definition of a Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. That, of course, is a kind of definition a pastor is going to use. But these guys are really talking in terms of a civilizational level. So,
but then, right, like I might say, although this is complicated because we have Noahides and Jews, and like, are they one religion or not? But exactly. I might say that Jews and Noahides are people who trust God more than they trust themselves. I think that's a totally fine definition.
Or the God of Israel more than they trust themselves, because we're going to have to get into this question of what do we mean by that word God.
So but then it just becomes, but it's not a semantic thing, right? We're not just changing the word God to, you know, like, because you believe Jesus is God, but that's right. So by using the word Jesus, though, you're indicating like the Trinitarian thing going on there, right? Like that it's God, but there's also this specific
Sam
part.
might say not necessarily the Trinitarian, but keep going.
Fair enough. Yes. So there's something to that where like we're not just dressing up perennialism with different terms and saying they're all pointing to the same pattern. We're making points that there actually are differences in the patterns by the words we're choosing to express these things in. And I don't know where Peterson would land on there, honestly. Like, you know, I have a feeling that he's fairly captured by Peugeot, and he would maybe agree with your definition to some degree, but like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Well, you want to say something, Chad? Okay, let me unmute you. Go ahead, Chad.
So I know I'm not asking, I know this could be a contentious question, but like, what does your Messiah look like? How does it differ than essentially than let's say Jesus Christ? I think the answer to that is something like he rose from the dead and ascended, but I'm not sure. Like, but how does it look different?
I mean,
in this way, you kind of are. I would say you're. It seems like, because we get the term Christian from the Christ, right? I mean, so in that way, in a sense, you are Christian, but not like the Jesus Christ Christian.
I mean, we don't believe that our Messiah is God, right? Like, that's a huge difference. Like, automatically, like, right, our Messiah is a human, purely human. There's nothing, and in fact, he's not even the final Messiah, right? Like, we have lots of Messiahs. Every single Jewish, every single priest, every single king of Israel was the Messiah in the sense of anointed. And then, like, you have Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, both called. Cyrus is called Messiah, and Nebuchadnezzar is called the Shepherd, but like seemingly in a messianic way. Neither of them are anointed with oil. They're not actually Christos, even though the Septuagint translates Cyrus as Christos. But he's like, and he talks about that, but like, they're not, right? So there's this weird change. Now, of course, we could talk about Second Temple Judaism. You know, the meaning of this term changes in various sects, especially where they have different understandings of what Messiah is. But our version that we understand that emerged from that is that they're not divine. There's no Messiah does not get resurrected. We actually have two Messiahs, right? And like final Messiahs, right? We have the Josephite and the Davidic. I guess this is a very different structure than Christianity has.
Yeah.
And it's also not the end of history, right? Our Messiah is not right. He has children. Our Messiah has children who rule after him, and they also are anointed, right? It's not just like Jesus and then like 1,000 years or whatever. I mean, I know we have different millennial, amillennial, postmillennial people here, but like our Messiah is a human who has children who also are king after him. Like, that's a very different model.
Yep. And those would all be good to press in. You know, it's good that Jordan's healthy because, you know, hopefully he'll be around long enough that we can, you know, have him deal with some of these questions, because it would be very interesting. But again, to a degree, the manner in which he's dealing with these questions, given that he's very much looking through a lens of archetypes, Jesus fits into that archetypal pattern much better than, let's say, a dynasty.
Yeah. What I would want.
Well, it depends on what you think the archetypes are.
That's true,
right? I mean, right? I mean, as I say often when I listen to Peugeot, like, I'm in a different symbolic world than him, fundamentally different symbolic world. Like, there's no, even with Messiah, like, it's not envisioned as a final hierarchy eschatology. It's actually envisioned much more flat egalitarian style. So like, that's already going to be a huge difference between like different types of archetype worlds.
Yep. All right, Alex, I'm gonna work through. You're after Sam, so I'm gonna give Sam the next. Oh no, after Sam and La Familia. You know, I got to do well by the Italians because I'm going to Italy. So Sam, you're next.
What I would want to push Jordan on regarding his, you know, kind of in between half affirmation of Jesus and the resurrection and stuff like that, is that he's still very much viewing this as an individualist self-identification exercise. And I think that he needs to be pushed, that part of the reason why people care is because it helps us know how to interact with you and treat you. And in a certain sense, it's very similar to the pronoun thing, right? Like, he talks about, like, oh, if you say you're a two-spirit, odd gender, queer, whatever, majigger, I don't know how to interact with you. I don't know what that is. And part of what we're navigating is this inner subjective, who are you and what does that mean in relation to me sort of thing. And he seems to get that in other contexts, but he doesn't seem to get that in the Christian context. Because part about what we care about, Jordan, is are we supposed to be able to interact with you like you're a Christian? And there are rules about how I interact with you. And there are social, things that go along with that. If I know you're in this group and you're willing to say that you're in this group with me, then I interact with you like you're a member of my group. And that's different than I interact with you if I don't know if you're a member of my group or if I know you're not a member of my group. And that's a perfectly valid social concern. And I feel like he's still treating this in this individualistic, well, I just need to really wrestle with my own conscience before I can say any of these things. It's like, Jordan, I'm not actually asking because I care about your conscience. I'm asking because I want to know how I can interact with you.
That's a great point. Okay, Chad, go ahead.
And I think he's doing all of that intentionally, actually. He's actually intentionally walking between worlds. And he said, I exist in two different places or whatever, which is a really weird thing to say. But I think that's what he's actually trying to maintain, at least publicly. Because I think he's actually not posing any of his actual beliefs. I think he's actually trying to model how to think, even though I could be totally wrong on that. But
no, I think so. And, Peugeot is the one who always says, it depends where you're standing. And Peterson is deliberately saying, I'm not going to define where I'm standing. And okay, but that's a pretty important interpretive aspect for this network of relationships. So that's a great point, Sam.
Also, it's like when Clara came into the corner, she was really reluctant to give really personal things about herself because she didn't want to muddy the pool, she didn't. And so I think I remember, I don't know, 4 years ago, the thought came to me, I was thinking, holy crap, Jordan Peterson is running an experiment. What is the experiment he's running? Yeah. And so he doesn't want to get too much personal in there.
Yeah. And, and again, Chad, you're right. I think it's intentional, but all of our intentional consequences our decisions yet have consequences. And there are consequences to this. And, there is one rather high profile individual that I have not yet had on my channel because of this, because basically for most people, unless they already have a significant bio out there on the internet, you don't just get to come on my channel to promote your book. You're going to have to talk about yourself first. And people, if people say, I don't want to do that, that's absolutely fine, because there are good reasons to not do that. But that does impact your participation in this corner, because the question is, how much of the fourth wall are you breaking? How much can you really participate in this space? Now, we know a ton about Jordan Peterson, but his status is a little peculiar and individual, but very interesting.
Are you mentioning Eastern Orthodox podcasters who have Dutch names?
I'm not going to say.
I'm just being vague, but Dutch named.
Yeah, you're so vague. Nobody will understand what you're talking about.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joseph.
I know these guys haven't even got a chance yet, but one quick thing. Something this reminds me of is I was listening to an academic conference last week, and the author has this very controversial. There was an author talking, and there's a panel about his book, right? And he named this book "John Within Judaism," which is a play on Paul within Judaism and Jesus within Judaism. And they spent the first half of their time just debating whether this was a real thing. Can we even talk about John within Judaism? And he said that was, and then he wraps it up by saying that was the whole point of half of his book, was not to actually name something properly and give it say this is the identity, but to name it in such a way that people engage in the discussion of whether it was a good naming, and that would bring people into participation. So you can say if you don't break the fourth wall, do you really participate? I could say you participate in a new way by and this actually comes up at the beginning of the Alex O'Connor conversation, where they talked about skepticism not as a skeptic as an identity, but skepticism as a methodology that is supposed to basically entice, drag, bring people into conversation with ideas and actually engage them, as opposed to just sort things and be done.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go so far as saying you're not participating. I think it's just a different form of participation, and it's much more dialogos, right? It's much more of the Ravakian dialogic participation, where you drag people in or whatever, you entice them or make them curious enough or annoyed enough that they want to really engage with the idea itself.
That's a good point. All right, any other responses to Sam's point? Otherwise, we'll go ahead, Alex.
I want to say something, but I realize that I'm going to sound foolish when I say this, because I want to start with saying I'm a simple man, so I can only contribute simple things, and I do apologize in advance. But when I hear perspectives as far as I don't have this fancy way of saying these. I just have simple words, but I do remember hearing that Christ called a fisherman, and he expected a fisherman with no formal education to understand the message that he was trying to bring to the world. And as a matter of fact, he got upset when they didn't get it, like when he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they were thinking, did he need, like as if it was some metaphor about something else, or maybe simple things like it was because we brought no bread. So like I said, I'm a simple man. And when I hear about Jesus the Messiah, those that believe that he is the Messiah, I do hear this complicated explanations, but I want to just bring it back into simple things, as far as what exactly is sound doctrine, and if the Messiah is going to bring sound doctrine to the world, like me, I'm a Gentile, right, where we didn't have access to the Old Testament because that was just not our thing, and as far as, and I'm going to try to go back, so because I know this is getting a little going off the trail here, but as far as whether the non-Jewish, they needed to keep circumcision and all that kind of good stuff, it was like, no, we're going to keep it simple because it's new wineskin, right? That kind of idea is what I understand. I could be wrong, but what I'm saying is, even when you read the historians like Josephus and all stuff, and when you talk to, or when you read other books about history, they don't ever deny that this person, Jesus, did miracles. As a matter of fact, they brought people that needed to be healed on a Sabbath just to see what he was going to do on a Sabbath. They don't, from a simple mind's perspective, a simple miracle in my mind blows my mind away, because it's not simple. There's nothing logical. There's nothing based in science. You can't, the withered hand, you can't do it in a second. You can't put muscle and bone and nervous tissue. You can't just bring it into existence in a second. So those things that are not denied, like a miracle, to me, it makes me wonder how much of the science do we really know if we claim to science, when if we try to understand someone like the Creator, he's been here forever. And if I can put a simple word to science, like technology, and bridge the miracle, science, and technology. So I'm going to say this in a simple way to understand what Christianity is and who this God is that he's trying to bring to someone as simple as me. The technology, one would have a person that has science as a metaphor to combine the miracles and science, to a person that's been around for thousands and thousands, millions of years, and they had technology to even give a voice command like LLM, voice activated, yo robot, can you construct me a 3D printed mechanical toy, blah, blah, blah. And with a simple voice prompt, this new technology just goes in about auto doing its thing and creates this thing so what I'm saying is this simple mind is trying to understand the miracles, the word, and someone that's been around with, for the lack of better terms, miracles and science. Like if I could swap out the words just for a little bit.
Okay, but can we have Joseph wanted to engage with your idea a little bit here?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so one, there are texts that do deny his miracles, so that's you can't exactly ignore them. They do exist. The second one is the majority of the Jewish texts. I mean, none of them say he does miracles, but there are some that don't deny it, but say that he was a magician like Simon Magus, right?
Are you saying the New Testament texts aren't Jewish texts?
We can differentiate the non-Jewish Christians, the non-early Jewish Christians, the texts that we have, and it is true that none of them are really contemporaneous, right? Josephus is after. The oral traditions of the rabbis, it's hard to date, whether they were contemporaneous or not. And obviously, there's nothing from Qumran on this, right? That's all earlier, well, the most part. But they have nothing about that.
The Apostle John wasn't Christian either, and his works are earlier or late?
Well, John's complicated. Do you want the academic answer, or do you want the Christian traditional answer? Right? Like I have a very different view of what these texts are and their dating, and that's going to be a complicated thing.
And you're okay to have those views. We're not. Yeah. I'm not going to criticize you for having different views as of mine.
But I want to get to your other point.
Joseph finish.
Yeah, I want to get to your other point about simple. To me, right? So I engage the Bible in Hebrew, right? Obviously, only talking about the Old Testament, right? But the Hebrew, one, it's a very compact, compressed language. There's a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of intentional ambiguity, and there's a lot of word plays, and there's all this stuff that is meant to draw someone in. And I don't think you necessarily have to be a complicated person, or like highly intellectual to participate in being drawn in, because a lot of it is through poetry, and a lot of it is, right, there's a lot of stuff going on that I think anyone at any level can access, but it is in this dialogic participatory way that I think is similar to how Jordan Peterson himself is dancing between worlds, and how that person at the conference was talking about their choice of language. I think once you say, well, I just want sound doctrine, you're already putting this into, I want to sort this into an identity box. I just want a proposition that I can hang on to. And I think that's, to me, I mean, there's a reason why Judaism doesn't have dogmas and creeds. Like, to me, it's an entirely different way of engaging with. It's a very Greek way. And we can talk about, whether it's a corruption versus a synthesis that's actually added.
A simple question, just one question. So when I'm gonna.
It's gonna have to be a brief question, because this isn't a 12-hour. This isn't a 12-hour thing, Alex.
So I'm gonna give you a brief simile, right? So sound doctrine is kind of like saying a simple truth, like 2 + 2 is 4, and we expect to see 4, right? So how many inches of days is there? How many Yahweh, like Elohim?
0.
Right? Okay,
I don't think any part of the Bible has something like that.
Okay, so I've got a follow-up question. That you said really quickly, is that sound doctrine? Is that like a basis of universal truth that you said? Because you gave it pretty fast.
So I think it's a universal truth that we get.
You just said that we don't have. You just said you don't have sound doctrine while saying you do have sound doctrine. So now you're confusing me.
No. I'm saying there's always a level that goes deeper. Sound doctrine in some sense denies that you can go deeper, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Joseph and Alex, this is a good thing for another channel and another chat where you guys can go back and forth for hours, but this is going to be a briefer show, and we got a bunch of other people are already in our little group here. Mr. Bazzani, what do you bring to the Jordan Peterson AOC conversation?
Well, actually, it is kind of a Jordan Peterson meme, right? But it's really a Tom Holland thing, I think the meme was, Jordan Peterson sees anyone and says, "Oh, you're a Christian," right? And Joseph, I get the concern, right? That if we try and, depending on how we try and define that, right, or try and articulate what they're getting at, right? In some sense, you start to deny the Jewish roots of Christianity, or you come across as doing that, right? So I think that's a valid concern, and I think it's an appropriate concern. I guess what I was gonna say, and this actually for me, this goes back further than Tom Holland, but there's an atheist economist from the UK named John Gray. I think it was in the book Straw Dogs or something like that, where he said that secular humanism was a Christian heresy, right? And I think there's something important that we're trying to describe there when we talk this way, right? And maybe if I had to take a stretch, you guys probably all know Tom Holland's work better than I do, right? But I think if I had to try and describe what Tom Holland is really trying to get at when he says Christian, right? I think what he means is the way that Gentile culture changed after Christ. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but Joseph, would that be a little bit more less provocative, a way of trying to name the thing, right?
Yes and no, because it still is. It frustrates me to some degree because Jews are still part of the West, and we were there. We were in Spain and France before the Christians were, right? Like,
well, notice
so
I said Gentile. I didn't say West.
You said Gentile. You did. But I also don't think it's quite my concern, right? I think my concern is more that he defines Christians so broadly it loses its meaning that can point to actual Christians.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's my concern, the other direction.
There's a functionality that is lost in the term. We'll say it that way. Because when you say actual Christians, you sort of beg the question. There's a functionality in there that they are, in fact, continuing to maintain and try to explore. But that functionality is lost by the way they're using the language. And even though Alex O'Connor, I think, did a great job of pushing back on a bunch of ways that Jordan commonly equivocates, both Jordan and Alex continued to equivocate on this matter, which is no small matter, especially because one of the big issues we're all dealing with is pluralism. And that to a degree gets at what Alex was trying to push at in terms of competing claims about metaphysics, about ontology, and some of these deeper levels that we're actually getting down to.
Yeah, so maybe if I could offer the way I've described it is Christian-ish, right?
Yeah.
And by that, what I mean is that this thing, whatever the phenomenon is, right, wouldn't have existed without Christianity, but at the same time, it has departed from being definitionally Christian in some more real sense.
Well, we got to get at the definitions, and this, I think, gets a lot at one of Sam's continuing things that he rides about, sort of originalisms. And okay, well, and of course, even this label Christian emerges in Antioch, where now Christianity is beyond the Jewish scope, or at least and even Tom Holland nicely pushes on, how are we using this word Jewish? Because that's another big issue. And it's a huge issue in the New Testament. As I'm still in the book of Acts, and it's just ironic when you have Luke writing about the Jews. Okay, Luke isn't a Jew to the best of our knowledge, but we're not sure. Paul certainly is, and almost everybody else in the conversation is. Yeah, what on earth is what? Yeah, not the.
Well, I would say they're also not. It's also not consistent. I don't think that the way Luke uses it is the same way Paul uses it, and certainly not the same way John uses it, which is huge. And Matthew and John use the Jew in a fundamentally different way.
Right. So there's huge issues involved in that. So, okay, Alex, I'm going to count your time before as sort of your contribution, because I think that was a little different from what Sam was pointing at. Jess.
Hey, thanks, Paul. So this isn't specific to the Alex O'Connor conversation, but it's something generally that Peterson's been doing. I just listened to his talk that was just released, the one that he's doing on his book tour. But he it's the whole aim high thing. He's like, what, he always says, like, and this is tied in with kind of his definition of Christianity, which is like, what if we bore our cross and we aimed high and we walked up, this is what you were talking about in your video the other day, Paul, about him saying, like, we're going to go up to the city of God. And if everyone took maximum responsibility, and it's this, this sort of semi-stoic stance towards what Christianity is. But, and I'm gonna kind of just like beat on my drum here. Like, I think no one's sort of dealing with something that's in the book of Job, which then just goes right into the story of Christ for me, which is, so one of the things that's set up in the narrative at the beginning of the book of Job is that Job was doing this. Job was aiming high. Job was bringing the proper sacrifices.
Yep.
Job was doing everything correctly.
Yep.
And what has he chosen to do? He's chosen to suffer for something else, for a larger purpose.
Vicariously, in some ways.
In some ways, possibly. But then you even get this in...
come on, Yosef. He's an example. Have you considered my servant Job? Job is an object lesson for the righteous of the world. Anyway, I'm sorry.
For me, he's more than an object lesson. I think he brings about an actual transformation in the world. And so this is what I will. He's this type moves into Christ. Christ is aiming high, and what has he chosen to do? He's chosen to suffer in order to bring about the new creation, and so this whole move, and this is my criticism of Vervaeke too, because he's like, I'm going to develop these practices so we have wisdom, and what's the evidence of wisdom? And wisdom should have these sort of external criteria in order that we can kind of determine what's wisdom and what's foolishness. And I'm just like, that falls apart in the book of Job. All that falls apart. And I'm not saying it's bad or anything. It's just that it doesn't include like this bigger picture. And so, that's about all I have to say.
This is the sound doctrine point of Alex's, right? My point to him. Like, where is the sound doctrine in Job? I mean, the whole point of the book is to destroy sound doctrine.
I have a quick question. I mean, a quick answer for that.
Make it quick, Alex.
5 seconds. The minute God says, "Have you considered my servant?" He already called him a servant. He wasn't his enemy. He wasn't his. So, right there, bang.
Strong point.
Satan
is also not his enemy in that book. It's very important.
Another strong point.
So there we go. That's the mystery, I guess. But and this is where Christ makes a difference, because then he says you cannot serve two masters. So then there's the question. Okay, what are these two masters?
Well, that's a whole discussion, because in rabbinic thought, there's an entire tractate that's on having two masters.
With Peterson or Alex O'Connor, or should it be another discussion somewhere else, Joseph?
I'll just point out Jesus is called a servant of God multiple times.
He is. He is indeed. He is indeed. All right, Jess, you get the last word on, unless somebody else wants in on Jess's point.
Well, I just want to, like, if Peterson's serious about the Christian message, I think, and even the message coming out of Judaism is that God can choose to, well, I'll just sort of say it messily, because God will choose you to suffer if you're righteous. And if you're good, and a lot of times his object lessons about like what's the proof of Christianity is this external prosperity of some kind, psychological strength, right, or strength in being able to hold things together in your community. These different things that Peterson, which is all true, like I'm not denying it, but it just doesn't include this other aspect of when things fall apart, how do they fall apart, and what is God doing through that situation? And that makes it personal all of a sudden, because then you have to trust God and not trust in the principles of wisdom or aiming high or whatever that is,
or what you're getting in response. This I'll let you in a second, Chad. But one of the things that you see in the book of Job is there's another system that comes online in the book of Job, and I would say then gets perfected and really pointed to in Christ, because Christ is sort of the second Job, in that he is the perfect man who suffers unjustly and is vindicated in the end. But the one system, the old system of let's say common religion, is do good things will happen. It's sort of karmic. And then in the book of Job, let's say in the Gospel of Job, in some ways, this other system begins to come online that says the appearance of productivity and flourishing is not all there is. And then Jesus, of course, being crucified, hung on a tree, is he cursed? And this reverberates then through Islam. So no, you're exactly right, Jess. And Peterson and Vervaeke are both sort of dealing with, okay, well, we're getting immediate reaction. That's sort of a scientific frame. Go ahead, Chad. You wanted to say something? Oh, you want me to unmute you?
No, I got it. Thanks. No, and so this I'm glad you brought this up, Joe, Jess, sorry. I was thinking about Peterson, when is he gonna start talking mercy? This is a big topic for my understanding of something that's completely left off the table in some sense. In Peterson's whole spiel, mercy, as far as I can tell, has never been brought up as even a point. He always talks about suffering, but he doesn't talk about mercy. So I don't know. I think it's related in some way to Jess.
And that's part of what we're getting at. Now, I'm also going to say, now I've got 9 people on the screen. I'm not going to have more than 9 people on the screen. And at the Breakwater event, we did what was called a fishbowl exercise, where basically what happens in a fishbowl exercise, they have a limited number of chairs, and then we'll let people in when you relinquish your chair. So and then also when we're done with Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor or the other AOC, then I'm going to clear the deck, and people can re-enter, but it'll be a different topic. So that's how I want to keep the topics going, because I know Grim Grizz has a not unrealistic skepticism about how well I can manage this number of people. So Grim Grizz, you are next, my friend. I'm going to put you on the big screen. I'm trying here. Wait a minute. There we go. There you go, Grizz. What say you?
All right, so there's apparently some confusion about what a Christian is, what it means to be a Christian, and I think that for the other AOC's needs, and for Jordan Peterson to think real hard on, the real simple answer is that there's, according to the book, there's this guy named Christ, and he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so that if you don't take communion, then you're probably not a Christian, because you're not doing what the man himself told you to. And that's simple enough for me. Is if you want to call yourself a Christian, you should probably be eating his body and drinking his blood, or keep his name out your mouth. No, don't use it against demons anyway. But if that's if you want to wear the label, I think that's probably the metric that everybody can agree on, and it'll solve a lot of needless.
Grim Grizz coming out as crypto Catholic. How about that? All right, Mr. Corner Citizen, what say you about Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor? He's speechless. His mic doesn't work. Go on to someone else until you sort out your technical difficulties. All right, Cosmic Smuffet, what do you have to say about Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor?
Well, I guess the recurring theme that there's such a thing as being a Christian and it's a club or it's an identity is a little confusing. If God is absolute, then even when you're deviating in some sense, you function inside the creation. And I think that in some sense, the need for this clear answer and for him to say, "This is what I am," is a defiance of the creation, because I'm always looking at the world and thinking like videos of wildlife eating each other, the horrific part's like one thing, but the other thing is the confusion. If you see a deer with a rabbit in its mouth and you're like, what is that? On some level, from the point of view of the creation, the rabbit is nutrients and the deer is hungry. And, you know, if Christ is the way, for one thing, getting hung up on the fact that Jesus was the way, that most Christians come to that way, is missing the point, because the way was there before him. And in places in the world where he didn't exist, the way was present there. And there must be people coming to the way in those places. In particular, I think about India, in which the concept of coming to the way has had so many different people involved. I mean, there even seems to be a sort of, you know, and that actually, and this ties into the time that came up, was there were many people trying to say that they knew the way, or they were being told the way. And this is sort of not the point. I mean, I thought the teachings of Christ emphasized the fact that it's not about that person. It's larger than that. It's about becoming a part of a body. And I guess what I'd say is, when you take communion and one of the ingredients is wine, and there are people like me and Chad for whom that is something that we have decided we can no longer participate in, and you have the whole branch of the belief that, like Islam, where one should never imbibe alcohol and that you cannot sanctify that. How do you reconcile that? And I think you reconcile it by looking at the creation and seeing that there is creation and there is destruction, and growth is a combination of the two. And if you need Peterson to tell you that he's Christian, then you might not understand what his function is. He's either a part of the path or he's not. I think he is. And he speaks louder to me than someone who professes to be Christian. That's just my opinion.
Okay. All right. Alex, I'm going to give you a final word here on the Jordan Peterson. It's got to be on the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor conversation.
So whenever they talk, to go back and forth, and he has to give the answer as far as whether he's Christian or not. He can't determine what Christian is or what it looks like. And he does, I mean, he's talked a lot and studied a lot about what the Bible and Christianity, but I feel like sometimes he overlooks the very simple things. He is supposed to be the new Adam, right? So the tree of life was in the garden. We lost access to it. Here comes Jesus, who says he's the bread that came down from heaven. The people that ate the manna perished, but if his spiritual bread, those that worship him in spirit, right? The water, the woman at the well. So all these are symbolisms that are there, plain and simple, but it seems like, I don't know, he focuses on other stuff when he simply says, believe that I am who I say I am. And he's supposed to be access back to the garden, back to the tree of life, to eat the real bread of life, right? Not the manna. To drink the real water that will never make you thirst, the spiritual. So all this, Jesus is saying that this is who he is. And I don't know, that seems to be lost on him.
He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life in the Gospel of John. I mean, it's a tremendously categorical statement. And this sort of gets to C.S. Lewis's trilemma. Why would a man say such things about himself? So that gets into a whole other question. Anyway, Alex, thank you for coming on. I'm going to start with a new topic, and you can come in again. And so thanks for participating.
Well, thank you.
All right. Let's see. I gotta share screen. Do I play branding in the middle? Ducks eat bread.
They do. They like it.
Still trying to figure out how to use these things. I didn't use it well because I don't usually live stream. I usually get to pause and do things. Present, share screen. Yeah, share the entire screen. Share this one. There we go. So Yeah, reading this book, which I've been doing in audiobook and going back and forth as I often do between the audiobook and the Kindle, it's a very interesting book. Now, the foreword is by Richard Schwartz, who apparently is the founder of internal family systems. That's what we mean by IFS. And he basically says, no, not demons. But the narrative that Faulkner is going in and in turn, including in his own life, very, very interesting stuff. Really interesting quotes from various people. William James, great quote from William James that goes far beyond this. As William James wrote, there is no source of deception in the investigation of nature which can compare with the fixed belief that certain kinds of phenomena are impossible. And I think part of what we are going into is, in fact, is in fact what's going on in this. So it's a very interesting book. I was on a late night stream last night with Jacob, and Mark said, you know, I've started reading that book. I don't want to read that book. I'm not going to say that everyone should read this book. I think for a lot of people, this kind of talk can be destabilizing. Part of, and it was funny because in the book he talked about part of the, in his experience, what these unattached burdens often major in is fear and deception. And it's like, or fear and confusion. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what they major in. You're right. So it's a very interesting book, and I hope to include some stuff from the channel with it. And yeah, so if anybody wants to talk about the internal family system stuff, come on in and we'll see. Before the 12-hour marathon live streams, I think that's a StreamYard limitation, 11 hours and 54 minutes. I talked to a prominent YouTuber that I know, and he says, yeah, that's a StreamYard, because if you just use plain YouTube, you can stream longer using other software than just 12 hours. So, all right, we got a couple of people who are biting on this. Chad, what say you?
First of all, it's a 12-hour stream on YouTube, I think. StreamYard will actually continue to record it, but if you do that. Anyways, this whole topic, I've been talking a lot about this with people. The topic around mental health in itself, I think it'd be wise if we can figure out a way to kind of somehow continue to contain the topic itself in a spiritual frame, because I think we've gotten in, and I'm not a mental health denier at all. I just think trying to somehow not leave the spiritual frame off the table intentionally, rather continue to somehow make sure it stays in that frame somehow, I think would be useful. And I don't know much, but it's just an intuition I have. That's all I have to say. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Chad. Alex, your word on the internal family system stuff.
Well, I think that mental health, so psychiatry and psychology is a fairly young discipline, and we're still trying to learn about it. And I know that the DSM-5 now, so it's been revised and improved. And I think one of the reasons why and this is my opinion, why they're so hesitant to, or they have this weird thing about demons and angels and all that kind of stuff, is because in the mental health world, there are people that are not religious in any way, shape, or form, right? You have a teenager or early 20s that has a first break with the family history of schizophrenia, and they claim that they're hearing an angel or a demon or whatnot, right? People with bipolar also, when they go into mania, they do end up with, remember, this is a person that has no religious background and claiming to be a prophet or Jesus and whatnot. So that's why it's for the professionals, I'm assuming, my opinion, that's why they're very hesitant to bring or to even ponder the idea of this thing that we cannot see, right? The spiritual world. And to be honest, if I was going through some things and I was in front of a psychologist or psychiatrist and I would be truthful about my anxieties and my worries and my emotional distress. But when it comes to my faith, right, whether I believe in angels or demons and the stuff in, the book of Daniel about Gabriel and this angel, and I would hold back unless I knew this person was a Christian and actually believed in the spirit world. I would not even mention that at all, because I would probably get labeled as schizophrenic for believing in things that are not real. So, but that's just my opinion. I mean, I could be wrong.
That's the modernist frame, and that's sort of what we're dealing with, and that's kind of why the book is frame breaking. So I don't know who is in next. I think Cosmic Muffet was in next. What say you?
Well, I think a lot about this because I feel pretty crazy. And something my father taught me that I think is pretty valuable is that, we have sort of like a medical history in our family. And the modern medicine zeitgeist has to do with precise language and being very definitive and naming every single small piece of the body in a way that relates to the whole, so that, if you really learn all the anatomy, you can navigate through the words. I think that has a great deal to do with spirituality, especially when it comes to thinking about translations of the Bible and trying to get the more authentic meaning from the more deeply considered, nuanced words, especially when you run into a word where, like, I always thought the kosher laws had a bunch of lines in it about, like, well, we don't know what this creature is. And it's like, oh, well, how are you going to know not to eat it? And, there's a whole puzzle built in that. So when we're talking about the psychological view of a family inside your head, I think that in some way reconciles the spiritual tendency to get very worked up about demons and angels. Because there's no question that if you look for it, God will show you signs all day long. And I imagine, from my point of view, I think that there are many humble angels. There's probably an unspeakable number of humble angels. They're not big and fancy like a burning bush. They're not going to upend your world, but they're there to deliver a little message. And then it's your job as a thing with free will to reconcile all these messages. And there's a lot of messages to reconcile. And one can certainly imagine that at a certain point, if those messages logjam in your head or in your spirit, then the demonic nature of them comes more out of you than it does out of them. I don't think that the notion that an angel falls has to go with the idea that it's still an angel and it probably can be redeemed. And how would that work? Well, they don't have the full integrity of spirituality that a human being does. So therefore, the angel's fate is tied to the human beings who carry the angel's message. And if the human beings are falling, then the angel's a demon. Right. And in psychology, they do, I think, a better job of having a very agnostic view about people's network of internal personalities that kind of operate autonomously and pay attention in specific ways, while other parts of them pay attention in different ways. And we have conversations inside, and that those help us reconcile this kind of, I'm going on and on, but anyway, I think that this is a matter of reconciling definitions and finding a gentler way to understand how even inside we must find a way to commune.
Okay. Thank you, Cosmic. Mark, you're next.
Okay. Oh, goodness. Well, I've spilled my guts on the mega streams. You basically have my rando. If you just go through 30 hours of content and cut through it, you'll find basically the whole story.
Why don't you do that for us?
But so anyways, it's no secret. Type 2 bipolar, right? Long history. Long story going back all the way to adolescence.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. First suicidal machination around age 9 or 10.
Oh my.
All right. Now, the way I worked my way out of it was not entirely at my own effort. I give God the glory and the credit.
Mm-hmm.
But a big part of that journey was me going into really basic forms of yoga and Buddhist meditation, where you simply stop drilling down on the self and you realize how empty it all is. And the capacity of the human mind to generate darkness is infinite. So the more layers and parts you dig for, the more ugliness you're going to find. This is my problem with IFS, I suppose, although I'm only halfway through the book. So I'm, and if I finish it, I think the man is well intentioned. His life experience is certainly as traumatic or more so than my own.
Yeah.
He's worth listening to.
Yeah.
And if there are people getting help, I suppose that's fine. But I think I think it's a process that's built in for limits, and you've got to. For me, like I said, I kind of in a Wittgensteinian way stripped myself down to what do I actually really know, and what do I and what I found out is very little. So what I could do then is let go of all of these selves that were driving me crazy, and find a kind of balance and center that then allowed me to kind of surf the biological ups and downs that are intrinsic to my disorder.
Yeah.
Okay. So I never got rid of bipolar. I don't get rid of the hypomanic episodes or the depressive episodes. I kind of ride them out. I surf them. And then Jesus reintroduced himself back into my life progressively and said, now it's time to have some faith. And we inched forward together in faith. And that's my story in short.
Beautiful.
I'm dealing with a family member who's in a mental health crisis right now. And all I can do is offer, well, do you want me to come down and pray with you?
Yeah.
I would not introduce her to IFS necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't not. I mean, I first want to say, go get professional help, get some, but whatever, I'm not the expert. But no more than I would introduce her to an exorcist. I'd be just as scared of taking her to a very reliable, professional, licensed, say Catholic exorcist as I would be at taking her to IFS, because I do not know for a fact that that's her problem. Yeah. Her problem could easily be a tumor. And my mother is currently in memory care for severe dementia. It's progressing quickly. And if you have any doubts about the human brain's influence on personality, you need to spend an hour in a memory care center.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. It, Paul. I don't want to talk. Thank you for the time. And I know it's not a friendly message for the corner.
No. It's good because there's a lot, and I haven't dug into this book yet on the channel, but there's a ton to push back on in this, a whole bunch of framing, and I think you addressed some of it very briefly there. Well, so thank you.
Thank you.
Afrael. I don't know if that's the best way to say your name, and you're like the Cyclops guy from the. I mean, are you gonna?
I wasn't planning on it, but we could see if that'll happen.
Oh, okay. Are we in virtual reality, or are you looking at a screen through some goggles?
Looking at a screen through some goggles.
Okay. All right. Well, either that or you're a different version of Mark Lefebvre with his pirate eye thing. So go ahead. What say you?
So the contribution I wanted to make was just to say that IFS makes too much sense to me to be dismissive about it. If you look at how computers tend to be wired together, or not wired together, but how they tend to be programmed, you typically have daemons, is what they're referred to as, where you have these little sub programs that are taking care of things in the background for you.
Yep.
And when you try and parallel that over to the human body, you have your digestive system, you have all of these automatic processes that are constantly happening in your body, and those are controlled by your nervous system. And you, presumably, the conscious you, lives in your nervous system. And so to have some way of communicating between those little sub programs and your conscious self, it just seems a little too on the nose to be dismissed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, working with that, though, one should be very careful. There's a good line from Warhammer that an open mind is like a fortress with its gates unguarded and unlocked. So
well, none of us are that open, thank goodness, generally. Some people really are. But you're right. And that's one of the things that I think IFS is really helpful with, sort of pushing back on a particular framework, which people have known for a very long time. I mean, right from the start, I was talking about my consciousness Congress in terms of, because that's experientially, there are little Jacobs and little Sams and little Jordans and little Johns and Jonathans, and there are little bunches of all of you, my wife, my children, my parents, my grandparents, C.S. Lewis. I mean, we have this capacity to actually manage many people inside of our heads, which is absolutely necessary because we have many people to deal with. Now, I'm very interested in the way that they sort of initiate a practice of internal conversation. I mean, that's so complex in terms of human beings. So obviously I spend time talking to human beings, and I spend a lot of attention to human beings. And so, no, I'm finding the book to be very helpful and insightful, but as with many of our other conversations about this whole frame of mental health, this is collective and there is a hierarchy, and part of the monarchical vision is that, okay, this is a science, and so therefore it's disconnected from ideology or religion or all of that. None of that is true. So
it's all connected.
It is. You're muted, Alex.
Carl Jung, he's one of the first persons that is started introducing the groups and the hierarchies and all that kind of stuff. And he had a fondness for Buddhism and all that kind of stuff. Now, I know he wasn't Christian, but there was
a son of a Reformed minister.
Yeah, but as far as I know that there's also another book about the body keeps a score, and they're still trying to figure out how our body works, the gut system and all these different compartments, I guess, for one person, mind, body, and soul. But I'm beginning to think that they started with something like Carl Jung, because he didn't agree with Freud. They started with something, and that's why I like the older guys like Eric Fromm, just because the way they saw human nature and our flaws, and how we end up becoming so ill that we end up with a mental with the breakdowns because of all this pain and anguish that we're trying to ignore, or we do the thing that's given us that turmoil, right? We're doing the wrong thing, and we don't expect our conscience to hurt. So they started with these very
Well, you gotta keep your soundbite short here, Alex. We got a lot of people who we just lost Kale. So
yeah, well, human nature is, and then now we're starting to kind of go away from that. The main points that Carl Jung, one of the first fathers of psychology, where they started versus where we're going. That's the only thing that I see as kind of like, yeah, they're trying to make good points, and yes, but I don't know. There's still that our actions will give us a lot of grief, and we'll feel guilty over that, and we still have to not ignore that very basic foundation of human nature.
Yep. And we lost Kale, which is too bad because I was really curious. I really wanted to talk to Kale about this. So who knows what happened to Kale? So we'll give him a chance to come back later. Oh, nice dog sighting. It. You know, dogs usually make any videos better. So what's your dog's name? Oh, you got to unmute.
Her name's Kelly.
Kelly.
She's an Alaskan Husky. So.
Alaskan Husky looks like a nice dog. All right, I'm gonna clear the screens again, and we are going to transition into, and we'll see if we can get a wild Federecci in here. Christian Reformed Synod. Now it is the Synod time of year, and what is Synod? CRC, maybe I should spell it out. People wanted to know what IFS was. It's one of the things to remind people of is that if you're actually trying to communicate, you have to do a whole lot of repetition. And so CRC is Christian Reformed Church. That's the denomination that I am a part of. And once a year, we have our Christian Reformed Synods. And the Synod is the the Christian Reformed Church has 3 levels of assemblies. There's the local council that governs the local church. There's a classis that is sort of the accumulation of all the local churches in a region. And then there's the binational synod that has delegates from the classes in the United States and Canada. And we come together to discuss and conduct our common business. And as is true for many Protestant denominations, questions about same-sex marriage and these kinds of things have sort of hit the Christian Reformed Church hard. Unlike many denominations, at this point, the Christian Reformed Church seems to be maintaining a traditional track. And in fact, a lot of my videos have been explaining to sort of the progressive wing of the Christian Reformed Church why, in fact, they have lost so badly. And what's been amazing me is that it's just really hard for people to take bad news. And that's kind of what's been happening. And so the only bit of synod that has happened, I know Jacob loves the Christian Reformed Church and the Christian Reformed Synod.
I drove you to Synod.
Jacob drove me to Synod in 2022 from the Chicago group. And so there were I almost did a video about it, but I just haven't had time to make a lot of videos. Part of what was interesting is that the new officers for this year's Synod, officers are elected for a particular Synod. They don't have a lot of power, but it's sort of a symbolic thing. They were all 4 men with Dutch last names from Midwest churches. Now, for a while, a lot of the synods were trying to have ethnic representation and all of this in terms of the person and the officers that really functions is the chair. The chair has a tremendously important job in terms of how well synod functions. So, but the other 3 positions, not a lot of responsibility, really, at least that's on stage. But there are also 3 millennials and 1 Xer, which was also an interesting thing. So this is just a sign of how things are changing in the Christian Reformed Church. Jacob, and the thing that has boggled my mind is how much interest there is in this corner about what happens in the Christian Reformed Church Synod. So Jacob Federecci, sea monster of the corner, welcome.
It's much bigger than just the CRC, what's going on. That's why. And this is what I wanted to ask you about. You always said from the elections of who gets elected as the officers, you can tell what kind of synod this is going to be. So I want to hear about that, but also you just mentioned the ethnic thing, but it's the ethnic people who are the most conservative.
Yes. It's the irony is that I just wrote a post on Voices this morning that the irony of this moment is that the that the mantras of the boomers in terms of diversity and youth, while the Christian Reformed Church is having a young revolution in a way in leadership, and to the horror of many of these boomers, because the progressives all tend to be older than me and very Dutch. We need more young people. Well, now they're in charge. We need more ethnic groups. Well, now they're in charge, and they don't like what they're bringing, because part of what's been happening, again, is the Americanization of the Christian Reformed Church and the Christian Reformed Church's roots as a confessionally self-conscious Dutch Reformed denomination. That's exerting itself. But the really interesting element, which is sort of a little where there's going to have tension, is there's a fair number of women that are among those conservatives, and some of them are ordained. And so this is where the Christian Reformed Church is a little different from, let's say, the PCA. Even the Abide Project has 3 high-profile women that are on their steering committee. So it's fascinating how this is going to go.
I have news for you. Marxists lie to get power.
Oh, I know some of these women. They are not lying.
No,
and I know other conservative women.
No, that's not what I'm saying. You said that they were saying, oh, we're all for diversity. Yeah, they're all for diversity as long as they get what they want. And then when it's actual, they change the argument because it's all about getting what they want, not actually believing in anything.
Well, I would argue that Tom Holland's thesis that I don't think that the affirming or progressive side of the Christian Reformed Church is in any way, I was going to say insincere, but now I've freighted that word. I don't think they're being duplicitous. I think the reason I started calling for a confessional conversation in like 2011 and 2012 was I could see that these two groups of people are reading from a very different religious script. And they're going to need to talk about this if they're going to live in a house together. And now, 10 years, 12 years later, what we're seeing is they can't live in a house together. And that's where things have come. Risto Evangelical, you seem to have a very Dutch face. We've never spoken before, but maybe I'm wrong with the Dutch face. But go on. That's what Dennis told me when he saw me.
Yeah, one of my best friends is Dutch, but I don't think I have any Dutch in me.
See, it's my biases, it's my racism. I outed myself as a terrible racist with respect to the Dutch.
I take it as a compliment.
Oh my. So are you a member of the Christian Reformed Church?
No, I actually grew up Nazarene. So and I'm not anymore. Right now I'm like in homeless churching land.
Okay. So you're very much part of the corner.
Yeah, very much. That's my attraction.
So what are you thinking about this topic?
Well, it's interesting. Like the Nazarene Church, we've ordained, the church I grew up in, they ordained women for a long time.
Yeah.
But are still kind of more on the conservative side. They haven't gone the way of most mainline churches, although that's a struggle there and that in the denomination as well. It's, as someone who's like in the market for churches, one interesting thing that plays into all of this is, as I look at different churches, one question that I want to know from churches is, do you practice church discipline? In a church that doesn't practice, and it's the churches I grew up in, and a lot of the evangelical churches, nobody really did practice church discipline. It was seen as kind of like an icky, we only do it if things get really bad. But I don't know how a community can function healthily without some degree of discipline. You can't have a cohesion there.
And that is one of the issues that is arising now, because the new group of leaders, when Jacob asks, what does perhaps the election of these officers signal? I think it could very well signal that there will be church discipline against Classist Grand Rapids East and churches that in their prophilicity have put up affirming statements on their websites. I suspect that there is going to be a round of a different level of church discipline. But part of what's different is that all of these things are changing. in that it is not the church discipline of the 1930s and 40s in the Christian Reformed Church. The context is very different. And that's where, I say things that progressives don't like sometimes. Some of the things I say to conservatives that they don't like. Number one, your point about women in office is an extremely important point. A lot of people simply want to reduce women in office to liberationist movements after the counterculture. That historically is wrong. There have been numerous conservative church traditions that have had women in leadership. And again, a lot of people like to point all the way to Deborah, a prophet. Now, they tend to be exceptional. And I think it was Jacob that has made this point quite well in the past too, that women do show leadership, but they tend to be exceptional, and their leadership is in a different way. And so then when you have sort of modernistic institutions that have to somehow figure out how women express leadership in the community, well, you have to figure that out. And so part of the reason that I've never really done a video on all of my thoughts about women in office. Part of the issue we have is that the historic sacramental traditions like the Orthodox and the Catholics had very strong roles for women, but in a certain way. And part of the flattening that comes into modernity is that, okay, it's got to be samey all over the place. And so that's a huge conversation that we haven't finished sorting out by any means. So,
well, in just the mood, I watched what happened with the United Methodist and watched a few hours of their gathering. One thing I've noticed in a lot of these church gatherings and what I grew up with is a very feminine. Now, but that term could be that could be too broad of an umbrella, because many women are very strong and make hard decisions and practice discipline, but a very kind of like motherly aspect to the church where I'm looking to see, are there any strong masculine voices? And again, these are like just very general terms, but is there anyone willing to stand up and say the difficult truths?
Yeah. And that, so part of the difficulty is that conservatives sometimes can overplay their hand in that, and then they get just sort of okay, you're saying difficult truths, but are you doing it as in these modes? Because if they're doing it in a certain mode or certain tone, they won't be listened to. So then the trick is, because as a pastor, one of the things you learn very quickly is there are times when you have to say a difficult thing. It's really hard? Having that difficult thing heard. And of course, recovery people know this, because all of those doors are locked from the inside. And so much of it is a matter of relationship and timing. That here's a difficult thing, but you might not be ready to hear it for the next 10 years. So I'm sorry, you're going to have another 10 years of suffering. And maybe all of that brutal loss in your life is going to create some cracks where the thing that you have never wanted to look at, now you have to look at it. Now, it's interesting that for John Calvin, discipline is a mark of the true church. That's deep in Reformed code. What's really interesting about that is the Reformers themselves were, of course, subject to often capital punishment at the hands of Roman Catholics, which was their form of church discipline, because of course Martin Luther gets saved by the state, as does the Apostle Paul by the Romans in Jerusalem. But so there's so much interesting stuff going on here, but I think you're exactly right. This is one of the big issues in this conflict that isn't being talked about. To what degree can institutions self-police, and is the leadership willing to do so, often at great cost? Because if your church discipline costs you nothing, it's going to simply be seen as authoritarian, and in that sense, illegitimate. So yeah, it's a huge deal. Lance, what say you? Another big Senate. You even got named in some blogs, Lance.
Well, and I would, and Kent Hendricks, for those of you nerds that are following along out here, his Substack is really great to follow along. He's been doing a lot of articles in between. But what I saw interesting, Paul, when I look at this, of the president, VP, first clerk, and second clerk, we're all abide affiliated. Right?
They are all abide affiliated, every one of them.
But the thing that I thought was really strategic, which is Derek, Buikema? How do you say his last name?
Yeah, nobody knows how to say these. Well, in fact, the way we say them in America, the Dutch people cringe. But in American Yankee Dutch, it's Buikema.
I went to go back watch him in 2022 when he was vice president. He has a really good winsome spirit. Like he was a good if I were thinking about it, just in terms of a strategic choice. Also, he has some. If you look at his bio, he does some comedy in his background or whatever. I think that's a really good sort of person to handle this kind of a tense moment that's going to be there. But I immediately, when I saw those names, I realized the Abide people got their ducks in a row here and pulled together a coalition and found some people that they feel like are going to follow through on the things that got left undone last year. That was my understanding from the outside. And they've also, like Joshua Christophels, I saw the Abide video this morning, is like he really understands his church order. It feels as if they got their ducks in a row. And I was curious on CRC voices, maybe the more let's just say folks who would be on the affirming side, have they seen that signal something? Was it surprising to them?
Oh, you better believe that signal was loud and clear received. And again, I've been trying to tell, because I come from the progressive wing of the church, and these people, I'm trying to tell them, it's that whole thing about telling a difficult truth. Look, you need to adopt a different posture and a different strategy, figure out what your goals are and move towards them, because the old and so many people still haven't. And it's like, after Synod 22 should have gotten it. No, that was an anomaly. Synod 2023, when they had a big push of getting out delegates, I had people coming to me saying, we really need progressive delegates from classes Central California. And it's like, number one, there are hardly any. Number two, they're not going to get sent to Synod. It's not, and it isn't. People listening to this will think like there's some backroom evil political cabal that's doing it. No, that is not really what's happening. But in terms of Derek, a lot of, I was really hoping that Scott Greenway could chair this thing. I contacted Scott and he said he has a couple weddings he's got to do, so he couldn't, but he wasn't even named. So this is a real change of leadership in the Christian Reformed Church. And so for a lot of, now the really interesting question, I've been thinking about this for a video coming up, is what in fact are the moderates going to do? Because once someone gains power, especially if they're fairly new, and these people are not necessarily institutionally connected, they're all from the Midwest, they tend to overplay their hand. And so it'll be very interesting to see, okay, how's it going to go? This is going to be a huge test for Derek, because managing that meeting is not easy. And it's super easy Paul DeVries is about as experienced a guy that we have at managing in that level in the denomination. And last year's meeting ended in an absolute catastrophe. So, yeah. Nathan, here's a Hollander born and raised in the CRC.
I'm so Dutch that I have to specify that I'm half Frisian. That's how it is. That's what my last name is. It's Frisian. Because there's a big difference, is what they say. But no, Paul, it's been so fun following all this stuff from the CRC. I grew up in the Orthodox Christian Reformed Church, which is a branch of the CRC that split off back from the 30s or something, that no longer exists now as part of the United Reformed Church, but it's like a much more conservative version of the CRCNA. But it's been a lot of fun watching. I did want to ask you, how do you see that going? Because there is this division where the young revolutionaries who want to take over these institutions, you see this in a lot of areas. They have all the energy, and they often have what I would consider, as someone who's very politically conservative, correct values, but they lack those institutional connections, and it really bothers me. So background for folks who are tuning in. So I'm in law school right now. So my entire project, and I'm like working in civil rights and constitutional law and all these things, right? Like very like on the ground advocacy type stuff. It's like I'm trying to like break into the elite and change it, right? And so I get irritated when I see ground level activists, hankering for change, but they're not willing to engage and build the kind of schools, or excuse me, the kind of skills that are necessary in order to actually be competent at your job. Because particularly just talking simple terms, which means to talk politically, you get in, you change up the elite. Well, what happens if you just get a bunch of people in the elite who are incredibly incompetent? That's not going to work out well. And I have the same fears for the things like for the Christian Reformed Church as well. So I'd be curious to hear, do you see anyone who is engaging in a way where they're trying to actually break into the elite with skills to change the institutions rather than just rabble rousing, even though they have some moral correctness?
I think in this case, the real crisis is whether or not these people actually want the institutions that first the builders and the boomers have built and shepherded for 100 years. And at this point, it looks to me that they don't care a lot. They care about how the institutions have been used against them, but they don't seem to care about building new institutions. And that's now, it could be that Abide itself is becoming an institution, but the difficulty, I mean, in that sense, now I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but in that sense, they're sort of like Trump, who, was Trump an institution builder? I haven't seen that. Now,
What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'm wrong. I'm happy to be corrected, but the Abide people certainly are well aware of how the institutions of the Christian Reformed Church have been used against conservatives for the last 50 years. They are very well aware of that. And they are, I think, in many ways looking to dismantle a lot of the institutions that have been built. But the question is that if you actually want to, and this actually is one of the strong points that Jacob continues to make. One of the points that our Jacob here, Federici, the Jacob's Corner, makes is about authority, continuity, and institution building. And in our culture, if you want to create authority or recognize authority and establish authority, you're going to have to build institutions. And the real question that the Abide crew has to figure out is, okay, we have all of this institution, the Christian Reformed Church. Now, a lot of it is going away because it was built from a particular Dutch ethnocentrism that at the same time as the baby boomers and a ton of wealth came into America, the Christian Reformed Church outgave and outproduced institutions compared to just about anybody. Well, those days are gone. And so there's going to be an enormous downsizing in the institutional level of the Christian Reformed Church. That is inevitable. But the questions for Abide is going to be, okay, what kinds of institutions are you going to build? And here's the tricky thing that Abide is going to have to figure out. Right now, they're putting all of their bags in sort of the confessional basket. And the knock on them is, okay, they're sort of young, restless, and reformed. This is a young, restless, and reformed invasion into the Christian Reformed Church. And some people say that's an alien invasion. I'm like, yeah, but did you ever notice anything about the Christian Reformed Church before the Second World War? Very Dutch Reformed, okay? It really was. And so all of the people who've been protesting, like leaving the denomination for the Orthodox Christian Reformed Church and the URC and all those, these were people trying to maintain, okay? So now, okay, the maintainers are winning, but they are not my grandparents. They live in a very different world. They have very different filters. If they're actually going to establish working institutions, It's one thing to mount, this is a long story. It's one thing to mount a revolution. It's another thing to establish a working regime after that. And knock the boomers all you want. They had a 60, 70-year run. You might disagree with some of the ways they took things, but that's a pretty good dynasty. And the question is going to be, what are these guys going to do? And to me, that's a super open question.
Yeah, how do you ensure that it doesn't just devolve into the same kind of non-denominationalism? But sorry, Jacob.
No, but you use the word dynasty, and that's what it hasn't been, which is people actually giving over to the next generation.
Oh, no, it has been, but it's been implicit. Look for Patricia Borgdorf at Synod at Grand Rapids East. Her father was probably the most important leader in the Christian Reformed Church from the, at the last part of the 20th century. And there she is at Synod. And Kathy Smith. See, you don't recognize this again because the Christian Reformed Church is so family oriented. Another important leader at the end of the 20th century, Hoffman, his son was my suite mate at Calvin. His daughter is Kathy Smith, who is now we've given her a new name, the parliamentarian. She holds a position of tremendous power in many respects. She's the daughter of one of the most important leaders at the second half of the 20th century. This Christian, Scott Greenway's grandfather, you can find his name as president of Synod time and time and time again. His father was my missions professor at Calvin. I'm a third-generation Christian Reformed minister. This has been the Christian Reformed Church, and many of these young, restless, and Reformed people coming in do not have Dutch names. And so these questions of dynasty are really going to be interesting.
So it's kinism.
There is a degree of irony in there that, Jacob, I think you're aware of because you've been paying close enough attention. But no, this has been the situation in the Christian Reformed Church. Families immigrated, and these families stuck together, and the family bonds. And so when Rita is at Synod saying, can my children be CRC? She's, is she talking confessions? Or has the Christian Reformed Church ever been about confessions? Has it always been a Cosa Nostra for the Dutch mafia? I mean, that's a real question in the Christian Reformed Church. So,
yeah, and just to illustrate further, like both of my grandparents on both sides of my family immigrated to the United States in the 1950s, and my mom's parents moved to Toronto, Ontario, joined a Dutch Reformed Church there. My dad's parents moved to Mount Vernon, Washington, joined a Dutch Reformed Church there. They were on opposite sides of the continent and different countries, but they met each other at a random conference, and that's how my parents met each other. And they dated from like 16 to whenever they got married at like 19 or 20, and that's how these things go. And that story repeats itself everywhere throughout all Dutch Reformed circles ad nauseum. I broke the tradition by marrying a non-Dutch person, which some members of my family are like, oh, come on, man.
No, that's true. All right, Tyler. Tyler is no stranger to any of this. Tyler, what say you?
Well, I think one thing was first, I'm one of those non-Dutch last name people coming into the CRC.
Yep.
And and a part of that is a whole long journey in terms of coming to faith and sort of where that led me. But I think the other thing that I've been curious about, just watching that pieces of that session, choosing officers. You and I both served in 2022 at Synod, and I remember just having conversation about, you got a sense of that, like there was a bit of surprise and shock at how wide the margins were, the tone that Synod began to take. And just the spirit of it. And I began to find myself thinking yesterday or the day before, whenever that was, what is this, not only what is this saying about sort of the direction, but the spirit of how those conversations will go, the interactions between people, and how similar or different will it be from 2022? Because I think in my mind, I don't see it being at all like 2023. Whatever that might mean, But I don't see it looking that way. Yeah, and I think it's also just been fascinating for me, again, coming in, not being sort of in-house and part of the family, and sort of occupying these sort of outside spaces. So I served in Iowa before moving. So our family's in South Africa now. So I was a campus minister, and so the university pastor types, we're on the edges of things because we're a little suspect because of the space we operate in. And yet, in the university, the CRC campus ministers often sit in sort of a middle ground between liberal progressive churches and ministries and the sort of evangelical and conservative parachurch organizations. And it's just fascinating for me, again, sort of, I think Nathan was just touching on this, that similarity you find in all these different places within the Dutch Reformed sort of tradition where it expresses itself. So our ministry here is partnered with the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa. It's an international church, so I work with all of the non-Dutch people here. So we have people from about a dozen countries across the continent, other places. But the way in which I see so many of these same threads playing out in the church here, that my colleagues or the people that attend one of the four Dutch Reformed churches in our city here. So it's just fascinating for me seeing some of these similar things unfold internationally. And then also those sort of outside spaces I find myself occupying, whether it's in a fairly conservative area in the Midwest or, in the university itself, but just sort of these strange spaces I feel like I think in some ways the CRC sits in terms of the bigger picture. So just a few thoughts on this as it's getting a little late here.
Why do you think there's so much? What are the commonalities beyond the CRC that is generating the interest? Someone asked earlier. Let's see. I want to talk about this, Jacob, too, because you're not right in that. Does the CRC know they're being watched city on a hill style? And I'd say many in the CRC don't know that. You'd be surprised how few CRC people know anything about me or what I do. There certainly are some, but it's so one of the things that you have to realize about a family is that families are mostly turned inward. And so when Rita asks that question, if by what you mean is performative, somehow inauthentic, no, this is the Christian Reformed Church. It has long been a family business. And because of the civil rights movement, it felt self-conscious about its own whiteness. And because and people were coming into the Christian Reformed Church and asking hard questions, they'd look around and it's like, can I go to Calvin College when everyone in class is a cousin of each other? I remember Dave Linder, who was a church planter here. He went to Calvin and he went to class. He was sitting by a friend, and the friend just kind of mentioned offhand that his cousin was sitting over there. And he's like, "Oh, well, we should go talk to your cousin." And the guy's like, "What do you mean? I'm always around my cousins. This is a family thing." And so then as Americanization continues, the big question in my father's church in Peterson, New Jersey was, and in this church back in the 70s and 80s too, can non-Dutch people be CRC? The beginning of the 20th century, one of the CRC synod wars was over whether you can baptize adopted children. Think about that. So that's how in the Christian Reformed Church has always been. And so then people who have always considered themselves cosmopolitan and they burned their wooden shoes long ago, oh no, that stuff is really deep. And it's hard for non-Dutch people in the CRC. Always has been.
But I don't know if the CRC realizes there's a lot of people, I think, that are in my shoes who grew up evangelical American on television advertising, who are looking for rootedness in depth. If there was a CRC church in my town that said, we sing psalms, we are Dutch, you have to wear wooden shoes when you're here and celebrate Dutch holidays with us, that would be attractive to me.
It would sell. Just like the Latin Mass. No, that's right. No, a lot of Christian Reformed Church people don't think that at all. But part of it is because they had these fights. So in my congregation, there's this Dutch song that actually came after the immigration wave that brought my parents, but before the post-World War II immigration. There was a Dutch Christmas song that was very popular. And there was a big fight in this church before I got here whether or not they should sing that song in Dutch. Because when I got to this church, there were still some people in this church who had Dutch accents and were in the Netherlands during the Second World War. They were some of the most beautiful saints I have ever known. I mean, they lived through hardship and suffering. And Canada was full of this generation, but that generation is dying off fast. And then you get the dynamic of the Canadian. I mean, Tyler, you're talking about campus ministry. Campus ministry in Canada is different from campus ministry in the US because of the difference in these cultures. It's radically different. So, I mean, some of the campus ministers in Canada are on the vanguard of the progressive element, where a woman pastor, I talked to her offline, she's campus ministry in Iowa, ordained CRC, and she's on the Abide board. So
she took my position.
Yeah.
So she stepped in for me. Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic. I remember, in talking about this issue of young people and how people view the CRC, like what are how. I was reminded of a quote from it's in Kuyper's Varia Americana when he came to the U.S. and I remember he came to Pella on that trip in Iowa, and essentially he told the people there that this place is dark and dour and the weather's miserable and I don't like it here. It's cold, and you need to just start speaking English. But and then he said, but I really am impressed that your organists can play the Dutch national anthem so well. And I think for myself and maybe, for students that I worked with at the university and, even here, I'm doing a leadership course with people in our church. And I'm going to be talking about, true and false churches from the Belgic Confession. And how do we see this echoed in African churches?
Yeah.
And I think whatever direction the denomination goes in the future, part of the conversation will be, what does it look like to blend and to, in terms of Kuyper's words, to take on that sense of speak English, become American, right? That assimilation, while also knowing what things to hold on to from the tradition and the heritage that younger people and people who are exiting out of other traditions may be looking for, and will they be able to navigate that well?
Yep. No, and Kuyper, oh gosh, he was another guy between the giant immigrations, and Kuyper has so many different sides. Both sides appeal to Kuyper. It's just fascinating to watch all this. The CRC civil war is a family civil war. That's what makes it so painful, because it isn't just finding another church. It's your your family. And Nathan knows this. I mean, the splits in the 90s, the Orthodox CRC and the URC. But this goes back to the Protestant Reformed split, where my grandmother's family was divided, and then my grandmother's sister, who in the family was considered a great saint, she was shunned by the church that she left the Christian Reformed Church for. I mean, this stuff is just brutal. All right, Mark, last word, and then we're going to get into TLC marathons. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. T-Grog is pounding the drum. He wants some scripture references for these decisions that you guys are making about your denomination. He keeps saying, no, I see no scripture, no scripture. He's saying very Protestant, so let's encourage him. Give him some scripture, boys.
I was just about to give some scripture. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, and the revealed things belong to us and our children to establish them. And when we get into the whole authenticity, sincerity, the prophilicity thing, that's scripture, I believe, is telling us, stop trying to figure out what's inside somebody's heart, what they say, what they do, and that's all we have authority and ability to get involved with.
There you go. Jacob bringing the scripture, and he can even speak in tongues. He can probably quote that in
I didn't say it in Hebrew because I knew you would accuse me of speaking in tongues. I do have that verse memorized. Yes, I do.
There you go. T-Grog, you got it in English and in Hebrew. How about that?
Does that CRC endorsed, Paul?
I
Can
think
the CRC endorse that scripture?
I think Jacob's right, and that would actually be a very timely verse for the CRC right now. So, all right. Any last words before we go to the TLC marathon?
Thanks, Paul.
All right. I'm gonna clear, and well, I'm gonna leave Jacob in because Jacob is, of course, he is the founder of the Just Chatting, of bringing BOM culture to StreamYard, and so I go away and you guys start, fulfilling Jacob's vision of the 24-hour network. What's with that?
Yeah. Well, first off, we need to give, and I think we start with Jacob. Jacob was the genesis of this whole Just Chatting thing, and he's been continuing it on his channel in all sorts of different forms, Bible studies, everything else. So Jacob is continuing the yeoman work. And I also want to make sure we get our affirmation out to Luke Thompson. So he started the first live stream on Thursday, which kicked off the first 15.5-hour live stream. And, it was fun. The thing was, Paul, is like that people just kept coming, right? So I'm like, okay, we'll keep it open. And Sherry played a massive role because she was spinning yarn, and so she had a lot of time, and so she was able to carry it. And once it got to ludicrous levels, I just like to do things like that. At some point, it was a challenge, and I'm like, we're going to keep this thing going. And it was a TLC world record. We checked. It's a TLC world record live stream. But and a lot of people, which is interesting, Paul, is people were starting to point to something was happening. And they were pointing to something like an Asbury sort of a thing. I don't know. But there was something that was going on. And one of the things I've really noticed, Paul, is, and Luke starting this year kind of got some energy going too. There's been a wave that kind of started with Waves of Sessions and other lurkers to Christian Backers to Pete's or whatever. But there also has been a hunger from a lot more lurkers who have wanted to participate in these Just Chattings. There's a Just Chattings. There's a wave that's going on. And the other thing, Hezi came in, which was really interesting, Paul, which is you need to keep things moving here. But because of the length and the time, it really kind of allowed people to chew on some things, get some things out, have a little more that crate. And once people realized we were settling into a very long thing, and there were, there was probably a couple, 3 hours in a row. It might have been pretty boring and whatever, and just not. But then these moments would break out, and people would share their stories, and there were some beautiful things that started to happen. So it was organic and it was fun. But I also think it's speaking a bit to there's some sort of a wave happening, Paul, where people are getting energized and wanting to communicate that I'm noticing.
I think that's Jacob. We have to give you a lot of credit for this. I think early on you saw the hunger for this.
It did come out of the studio. I mean, I just saw that there are enough lurkers that Discord wasn't able to allow the lurkers to completely lurk the way they want to. And yeah, my whole thing is I don't think this corner is large enough for all the people who want to come in. And I get very, very upset at the people who don't even want to accommodate all the people coming in. And we get that a lot. People are like, you'll ruin it if you bring more people in.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting because the Chicago group, when Sam was talking about when you have on your channel, when they were talking about estuary, and the Chicago group isn't an estuary, and because that's what happened with my Jordan Peterson meetup, is we got to a point and some of the regulars were like, we don't really want new people. And I thought, well, okay. You guys, you can continue to meet in your own homes. I'm not going to tell you not to meet with your friends, but part of me is you have to keep that empty chair there. And you have to, because once you sort of close it, it begins to die. And you have to sort of, it's chaos and order. You have to figure out how to maintain that balance. And you always do that. Optimal grip is always about sort of opponent processing,
but
doing this.
Paul, it's not just the fact that it would die. It would die in the sense that it is choosing sin. It really is. To be so selfish. Like, one thing Garth said to me that really has stuck with me is the people who are most passionate about this little corner are the people who have seen the power of community and want to see it again and see it available, right? And I'm sorry, like, it drives me insane when people are like, this is good. Let's just keep it to ourselves. It's like, where's the messianism?
Well, that's it. And like Chad shares this poem all the time. That's called "I Keep My Hand on the Door," right? And so I understand it was really awesome when it was. I'm just gonna say this: all the small little cool kids had their little thing and nobody knew about it, and that's fun. But then it changed, and it has changed, so we can't go back, right? And I do think it is important to kind of keep the hand on the door. I would give a shout out for the Bridges of Meaning voice chat channels. Tayo, David B, Tunji, Joy has been showing, Mandy. They're carrying the weight over there. They're there a lot of times. Let's just say United States Central Time between 7 a.m. to like noon or 1. So that, and people are sticking around there more. So that's cool to see that vehicle happen. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, listen, we're still, Paul, the beautiful thing is like, you don't have enough people following you yet that it's not exploding things too much down here.
Right.
So
right.
There's almost a cap on, and that's good, right? Like, it's not anything we can't handle. And so I'm not even nervous about that. But this also kind of feeds in a little bit to this whole CRC thing. What do you expect if you evangelize and you bring in lots of Koreans and Latinos? Eventually, if you're good evangelizers and you grow your church, it's no longer going to be Dutch. What were you expecting to happen?
I know, and that's the irony of this thing, that the groups that were just we're beating ourselves up because we're so Dutch. Okay, well, now the Koreans and the Hispanics, and they're all at the table and they have a voice at the table, and you don't like what they're saying? It's like, this is what you asked for. Just, okay, you might not like it, but that's the whole business of, we want to give other people leadership. Well, they've got it now. So yeah. Alex, you jumped in on this. You've been sort of a newbie in this, and you've been on the channel. So what say you?
So yeah, this happened pretty much by accident, I suppose. So I'll make the long story short. A few months back, maybe a year back, I was, as I was prowling, lurking the internet, I did see Girl Country on there, and it just happened to be that the discussion that was going on caught my attention because it had to do with Christianity, but it had to do with not closer to what I was looking for. I want to hear sound doctrine, and I know that means a lot to different people, but for the long story short, and I liked what I heard, so I'm like, I'm going to subscribe, right? And then that was it, because my attention span led me somewhere else, and before you know it, I was just lurking other channels, whatnot. But then what showed up on my feed later on, months, was a Stranger Theology by Pete, because it's the same kind of feel to it, and it caught my attention. And I'm like, what is he saying? So I subscribed, right? And that was that. Like I said, I was still watching the stuff that I used to watch before. And then I started watching a little bit more, just here and there. And this just happened just not too long ago, where I was working in a backyard, and Pete from Strange Theology, he was mentioning some stuff about the symbolism and Exodus, and he wanted to, I don't know, he said a comment to like the viewers, and I never really comment. So he said something, so I'm like, I'll comment, right? And that I was not expecting to get a reply. So that's like, what? He's replying? And even then I think he invited Christian Baxter, and he wanted to do a sound check, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can hear you guys. And anyways, I just felt like I've been listening to this guy, and I like what he's saying, and he actually responded to. I mean, I'm just a random stranger out of nowhere, And anyways, one day I see this live stream, and I'm like, I like what they're saying, and for the first time, I don't know, don't ask me why. For the first time ever, I actually noticed that little click, the little link to join. I don't know why, I've never seen it before, and it just happened to be that day. I'm like, I wonder if I should click on it. and before you know it, there's this huge thing that's going on forever and ever. So it didn't matter when I logged on, it was there. So I'm like, I guess I'll click it. And I found this community where people can have different opinions, and they don't get, it's very cordial, and the people are patient, and it's like no animosity, no disrespect. And it's like, that's what you expect to hear from people that are following after the same master, same Lord. And I just found it so very unique, and it was just by happenstance. It just, one thing led to the other, and I had never actually clicked on a comment, hardly ever, and never once when it was live, and never once did I expect for the person to actually reply. And I'm like, this is just not. It's just, anyways. I just found that so strange, but in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alex. Well, I'm glad you clicked on, and I'm glad you keep clicking on. And here's one of our leaders here, the bib overalls. I'm gonna have to get you you and Herb Shear, the bib overall guy at Synod. I'm gonna have him on the channel soon. But
I think Herb's is authentic in his overalls, Paul.
He sent me, after Clay made that comment about it, he sent me an email. He says, I have 6 pair of these. I wear them all the time. It's like sort of like saying Chad the alcoholic is his pro felicity is the bib overall. No, that's just Chad. That is just Chad. So what say you, Chad? Or are you just gonna can't talk now? Oh, he's going out to the car. So no, and it's
Chad's been live streaming in the mornings, which is great. He's doing he's sharing his morning routine a little bit, and people are jumping in. Christian every now and again is live streaming. You're starting to see that puck up.
We could be served by another level of organization where there's and one of our smart coders among us should be able to, there should be sort of like a directory where you can go to a link and, okay, YouTube is doing that to a degree because the live streamers go up to the top, but it would be nice to know, okay, a lot of times we do it when we have found time.
Well, Ryan has thislittlecorner.com, which is the only official listing of the channel.
No, I think you're right, Paul. Just an AI algo notification anytime someone's coming, you figure out which channel's going live. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, welcome, Alex, and I'm all for the doors being open. I'm all for it. The thing is, and I think it will be, but I'm not concerned about growth at all. I think the topics are way too niche. It's super steep slope. So in order to stay, you have to play in a sense, even if it's lurking. Lurking is a type of play. And like, other than that, I don't see it. It's so unlikely for it to be flooded. That's why it's not like, I don't think it is exactly like Senius, because like Peterson is a Senius problem. Like, so we're downstream from Peterson's Senius problem.
Yeah.
But we don't have, we have, and our co-felicity is very steep. And so good luck with that. It's hard enough to, sometimes, like if you're, I don't imagine a lot of folks are like I am, where I kind of like, I could be, get my feathers ruffled enough. It's hard enough to really love this place and keep and stay sometimes. It's hard enough to do that if you care too much. So
well, you do have that sphincter issue.
I do. I do. And my, and so it's helped me out with a lot of things, but man, boy, do I, I think it's really a beautiful thing, but I'm not worried about growth at all.
Yeah. I'm really not either, because for all the reasons you named. Now, at the same time, Jacob does have a pretty big spot in my Consciousness Congress, and his issues, even though while I'll often resist him, his issues are important, and he is right that I often think too small, and I'm often not sufficiently ambitious. And and people will write me emails sometime and ask me, why do you tolerate Jacob? And I say, well, I love Jacob, and I believe his heart is in the right place. And even if I disagree with him on issues and we have big fights over whether or not I'm the leader of the TLC, et cetera, I hardly even dare mention that.
Yeah.
But
but Paul, there is some.
It's not like I'm saying free for all. I'm the guy. I'm the hierarchy boundaries guy, right? And so that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is always you have to leave that empty chair.
So
100%, always, yeah.
The one thing I think that would be really wise of us, and I've floated these past you for a couple of years now, Paul, is like it's good to look at the history of other organizations that are similar but different, and gain the wisdom that they have. And I think like AA isn't just Senius thing either. There's a weird reason why it still sticks around, mostly because it's still effective.
Yeah, and it's still also needed.
Right, but it only stays because the care that is being participated in at the individual level.
Yeah.
And so that sort of thing only really happens by sharing, like, so I'm talking specifically about traditions and stuff, and I don't know how we, if we were to decide to move forward in some way and create those kinds of things, I don't know how that would happen, but it's going to boil down to somebody's just going to have to get off their ass and do it, because nobody wants to do it.
Well, but here's the deal. See, there are things growing up. Listen, Paul, you're a bottleneck. right? And you know this.
Yep.
And so what's happened? The estuary folks are out there organizing some things, getting some things going. Jacob's got the fountains of comfort. Like, I mean, you know, the one critique, like what you just shared here, which is like, you know what? I probably could spend a little more time thinking a little bit about some slight organization, but we are in such an infancy stage. Like organically, this stuff is growing up. But Chad, the thing that I think what's really beautiful about here, like you mentioned, it's hard to stick around sometimes because sometimes the conversation goes at an annoying level, like the hive mind gets picked into something and annoys you or whatever. But that's what like going to a church is. Like the people drive you crazy, and you can just pick up and leave whatever, but you just got to stick around through the messiness if you really care about something. So that's actually, it models community because that's what happens. You get annoyed by people and you want to storm off, but you love it so much you stick around.
Yeah. Mark, what say you?
Sorry, I'm back again, Paul. I apologize.
That's okay.
But William,
Hail Marys.
wrong denomination. William Branch and I kind of stumbled into something where for me, it was helpful in that it's basically we made connections in the comments a few months ago, and then we started the talk offline, and it's triggered in me a thought that which answered lots of questions. It helped me kind of get into kind of connect into the stream a little more easily by having somebody kind of help me along in the process, both processing and conversation, my own experience, and integrating what I'm experiencing with the corner. And it just seems to me like you could break through the bottleneck in terms of numbers through that kind of mechanism where you might have a layer of low-level leadership that just assign interested newbies to little short-term mentors or whatever you want to call them, on-rampers or whatever you want to, we come up with some clever name. You guys are all good at that. And just plug to help plug and get them rolling. Then once they're rolling, then it gets much more relaxed. And I also have a new friend, right? I mean, that's basically with William.
We don't have sponsors here, which is a big
but so here's
sponsor,
what I'd say. We do have on-rampers. Like Tayo is serving a big on-ramping role. Like those are the people who are keeping the Bridges of Meaning Discord voice chats open. That's an on-ramp. Having the just chatting is a bit of an on-ramp. I think one of the things that this is like, unless you're willing to work a little bit to get into this little corner, you probably don't want to hang around this little corner. You know what I'm talking about? Like it takes a little work. No, I agree with you, Mark. Like we do this, but I do think some of the slight difficulty to on-ramp almost shows kind of the personality type and the interest of the types of things that go on
for
here.
men. Can I just say for men that does? I think for women on the internet have a whole different level of experience, and it may not have to, and their reticence may not have to do with their being extroverted or introverted. That sexual harassment on the interwebs is for real, and it's a good reason why we probably have we're only 10% or 15% women. We might see. And I thought like one of the best things that was Paul's women's only live stream he did. We could use more of that. But I'm just saying, I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. I just think that for people who need plugged in, but maybe don't, who could benefit from local estuary, who are following the videos and the live stream somewhat, and maybe even commenting once in a while, but don't go on to the Hollywood Squares.
I think I'm picking up some of these comments over here from the women. I don't know if they're agreeing with you. She said, like Mandy says, it's more of an interest problem. Sorry. I think the biggest issue, and Jacob pointed this out, I can't remember on one of your live streams, some of the biggest thing, particularly, it's an introvert-extrovert problem. Like trying to find a way to invite introverts in it's you talk about a steep slope, like but that's why they can lurk and listen. And even like you can come into BOM voice chats and you can just listen. You don't have to jump in and participate. But eventually, once an introvert gets comfortable, I would do that. The one thing I would say, which is, and I spend a lot of time in the BOM and on here, what I do love is maybe in one, or I only think of one instance, is that and again, until a woman comes in to check it, there's been no sort of sexual, like that whole like woman shows up sort of stuff that can, weird stuff can happen. I think this has been cultivated a pretty safe place for people.
I agree. This is, yeah.
On my Discord, I have designated female mods, and if you want women to be comfortable in a space, you have to create women-only spaces. If you have to be deliberate about,
my wife would say that. My wife would say the same thing, Jacob.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Anyways, that was my thing, Paul. And the only other thought I had too was that we have another potential. I'm a newbie here, so it's just thoughts I'm experiencing. Is that we have another potential bottleneck in the possibility of is cross-pollination a threat, particularly to we have the possibility of cross-pollination between Christian denominations. That is, people jumping from Pentecostal to CRC, or from Catholic to
why is that a threat?
Baptist. That's what well, it's not. It's not a threat to Christians, but let me expand that out. We've got Jews, and then potentially Muslims, and potentially others that aren't within the Christian faith. And one question, it's an open question in my mind, is that a threat in Jacob's mind? Is that a concern, or is it more like, bring it on? I'll definitely net more converts than you, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know if that's an issue at all. And I mean that somewhat tongue in cheek, Jacob, but you know what I'm saying? Is that an issue or a possible?
Well, I have
always the community.
I have always been a liminal figure here, and I can only be a liminal figure here because that is what my religion tells me to be, right? So I have no designs on proselytizing, and to the degree that I am actually proselytizing, I am doing something wrong. So I am perfectly happy, and in fact, I have demanded that this be the Christian space that it is. I would like a pew where the Jews are allowed to sit. And frankly, even if there is, at some point, you guys decide Jews are not welcome, that's, hey, it's happened before, Paul.
It's a good point. It's a strong point. Although we should say that you guys kicked us out first, so
actually, we can talk about that. I don't think that's what happened. But so when it comes down to it, look, my God is the God of truth. I'm doing my work. I'm doing what I need to do to help bring the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, right? And like what shape that takes is not up to me. The consequences of my love for God, the fruits of my belief in God are up to God. And whatever those fruits are, that's what I have to accept. And that's not Calvinism, Paul.
Here we go.
Okay,
I do want to say one thing for the spirit of Sherry to be here. One of the things Sherry said, this issue came up, and she was like, I don't want a women's only space because she hates categories and so on and so forth. And so that was what that is what Sherry kind of would have said. And at least on the Grail country, Sherry has a very powerful voice in the Grail country, bringing that matriarchal spirit. And now we're in the TLC marathons, right? And the other thing that she does so well is helping us to see things, but also Sherry will very directly disagree with you in a very nice way, but she does not hold back. And there's lots of strong women in our group. I love them, and they're over here in the chats right now, and like Laura and others. And so But Paul, you try to bring that out as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because you want them to know that they're welcome.
And the TLC has always been a space like Estuary where, it is very strongly Christian, but we really try to hold the space open for people who are not Christian. And that, to me, once that space gets closed, I probably will leave because this Estuary is church adjacent. It's not, and we need various spaces for different kinds of things. So, David, what say you?
Hello.
Hello.
I just thought it was kind of funny that Jacob said the most Calvinist thing imaginable and then said, and that's not Calvinism. He just said, no, it's not up to me. It's entirely up to God who brings about the fruits. And I'm like, oh, yeah. You're quoting Paul right now, right?
Fruits. I make the choice because God has given me the choice, and the fruits are up to God, not whether or not I choose to do right or wrong. That is completely up to me.
Yeah. Well,
just keep thinking that, Jacob.
Jacob, I wonder what your thoughts are, because regardless of who kicked out who and all that business about the initial, or I know that to some extent we're not entirely welcome anymore at synagogue. And so I wonder, Paul, what you were saying about the importance of this space, I think is I need a place where I can have conversations with heretics, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
And I think, Jacob, you've benefited from that as well, where this is, you need us good heretics to set you in the right direction.
So I have to say, a Beit Midrash is a real thing in the Jewish community. You can go to a Chabad house and find heretics like me on a constant basis. The one thing I explain to Protestants all the time is if you go to a synagogue on a regular basis, at least once a month, somebody will yell back at the rabbi during his sermon.
Yes,
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's wild.
One time, my rabbi was going on for too long, and this old man just shouted out, "What's the bottom line, Rabbi? What's the bottom line?" Like, he was just so irritated that it was going on.
Beyond that, people will disagree with the rabbi during his sermon. Like, imagine that happening in a Protestant church.
Yes, I want it so bad. It's yeah. It's definitely something that the synagogue does better.
Could I interject here for just a second?
Absolutely,
I just got a phone call. So I'm going to have to run. So it's not like I want to say this and then just run. So before I ran into TLC, it seems like the more I learned about Christianity, the more I devoured the Old Testament and New Testament, the more I listened to pastors and bishops and priests and all that stuff. My idea of what Christianity meant changed. So I got to listen to different denominations and I got to hear the perspectives. And I don't think we become less from different Christians' opinions. As long as you say, show me where in the Bible, and that's okay. Just show me where in the Bible. And yes, and I do want to hear, because that's the only way I can learn something that I don't know. But I do want it to, in the end, whatever your idea is, please show me in the scripture so that I can try to see from your point of view. But I don't disagree that we need to fight from someone that has whether they're Protestant or not, whether they're Catholic or not, whether they're Calvinistic or not. That to me, that doesn't matter. The thing that matters is this: is it biblical or not biblical, right? If it's not in scripture, then show me how your story kind of reflects back to the scripture. But that's what I like about TLC, that there's different voices, different opinions, and everybody gets to say their piece. And that's actually, in my opinion, that's a good thing.
And at least we're all on topic with sola scriptura, right? Can I?
I was gonna say.
But I have to point out the 30 shekels you just got from Yoav.
Oh, is that shekels? I didn't know what it was. Bye, Alex. Good to see you. So
yes, that's 2 Israeli shekels. You just got $8. So
yeah, but that's the amount that Joseph was betrayed for. So that's something to remember.
Symbolism happens.
Yeah, so 30 shekels of silver.
Well, we're gonna bring this stream to an end. My poor dog is gonna have to get out there and do some things. But this is very fun, and just to it's one of the videos I didn't get done this week. Also was John Vervaeke's conversation with Christopher Matto Pietro from Parallax, where John is basically really doubling down on the Silk Road instead of the religion that's not a religion. And that's where, the TLC is very much a Silk Road. And it is, we have pluralism, we have globalization. Okay, let's talk with each other. And, I think even though some people look at Jacob sometimes and think, does Jacob belong in the corner? A lot of the things that Jacob has been talking about here are huge corner values that they just come in a different Jacob style package. And so that's kind of the way it is. But and David, I've so appreciated Lance, Mark too. I mean, you guys who have shown up today, you guys have made incredible contributions. And Lance is right in that I feel so often how I am a bottleneck. And on one hand, that's painful. On the other hand, what I've loved seeing in the corner is people are like, don't wait for the PVK bottleneck, jump in and do something. And so we've had this proliferation of all these new channels. Christian Baxter is just going to town.
Paul, at some point we have to talk about it, because my metaphor for you is very different, which is that you're the guy who owns the bar. And so you book the bands. And so it's not, I like every single style of music that's here. It's when we invite this band in, all this other stuff happens, and they have a platform where they normally wouldn't. And you're not a record producer. You're not bringing in the bucks. You're giving us a space to play music and have these weird communities that pop up. This is my metaphor, which I can go further with. But that's what I think you're doing. That's how you're the bottleneck. You book the bands.
Yeah, that's probably pretty good. Jess, coming in at the last minute. What you got?
I'd like to make an announcement reminder of Estuary Northwest 2024. We have a website up, estuarynorthwest2024.com. We have Paul Vanderclay, Dr. Michael Martin, Dr. Chris Green, and Karen Wong speaking. This is September 12th through the 14th. And Nate Heil and Grail Country's hosting it. And
Grim Grizz will be there.
Grim Grizz. There's a bunch of people. Sherry's involved.
It's going to be in Olympia, Washington, in a Christian Reformed church that is currently pastored by a good friend of mine, Mark van Heidsma, another Dutch last name, who's been pastoring in Olympia, Washington for a long time. He agreed to have a space. And actually, when putting together an event, finding a space is a huge challenge. And these Christian Reformed churches, the one that they're working up in Chicago for 2025 that Chad's leading, there are some new events that are on the horizon, and some new interesting mixes of speakers and some new voices. I like that metaphor, David. That's a good one. I like that. So
it goes further. We could talk about it some other time.
All right. Any last words that y'all want to share?
Thanks, Paul.
All right, then I'm gonna have to bring in some branding. Any requests for branding? I only have a limited ones that are here. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and we'll land the plane now.
Fast Freddy G knows it all. That's my old name, G. I waited for the Lord on high. I waited, and he heard my cry. Tell him we're dancing, we're busy dancing right now.